will be dismissed. Decision-making will remain with us." A stunned silence filled the room. The so-called outsiders he referred to included the very people who had built NeuraCore's success: scientists, strategists, and visionaries handpicked by David himself. Some directors shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded reluctantly, aware of the Morganstein family's majority shareholding. Nepotism was about to become official policy. But one man at the far end of the table remained calm: Daniel Reyes, NeuraCore's chief legal officer. His sharp eyes revealed nothing, though his mind was already racing. The forgotten clause. Years ago, when NeuraCore signed its first investor agreement, David had insisted on a meticulous contract. Buried deep within its 100 pages lay a critical intellectual property, IP clause. All proprietary algorithms, patents, and innovations were owned collectively by the company. Any transfer, restructuring, or reallocation of those IP rights required unanimous board approval, not just shareholder majority. It was a safeguard David had insisted on, fearing exactly what was now unfolding: a family coup. Daniel remembered drafting that clause. He also remembered the day David told him privately, "If my children ever put blood above brains, this clause will protect NeuraCore." And now, that day had arrived. A quiet revelation. That evening, Daniel met Sophia Zhang, one of NeuraCore's largest outside investors holding 15% equity. They met in a quiet downtown restaurant, away from the Morgenstein's eyes. Sophia leaned in, frustration etched across her face. "Elliot's plan will kill the company. Investors are already panicking. If nepotism takes over, we're finished." Daniel set down his glass, his tone calm but resolute. "There's one path left. The IP clause. If they push too far, we can block every move. But if I use it, there's no going back. It'll be war." "War against who?" she asked. Daniel's gaze hardened. "Against the entire Morganstein dynasty." Sophia's breath caught. She knew what that meant. This wasn't just about boardroom politics. It was about dismantling a family empire that had ruled NeuraCore like royalty. The coming storm. Back at headquarters, Elliot celebrated with champagne, confident of his victory. He had no idea the very foundation he stood on, the company's intellectual property, was locked behind a clause he couldn't touch. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his dimly lit office, overlooking the city skyline. His fingers traced the legal file he had kept for years, the one clause everyone else had forgotten. "The smallest clause," he whispered to himself, "can topple the largest throne." And with that, the first move of the $300 million corporate showdown had quietly begun. The boardroom tension lingered like smoke after a fire. Elliot's announcement to purge the company of outsiders had shaken the foundations of NeuraCore. But Elliot didn't know that his plan had already ignited a silent counterstrike. Daniel Reyes, the quiet chief legal officer, held in his hands the one thing Elliot could never control: the IP clause. The secret weapon. Daniel spent the next 48 hours buried in contracts, legal archives, and records of every board resolution since NeuraCore's founding. He needed to ensure the IP clause was airtight, no loopholes, no ambiguities. There it was, buried in Section 14.3 of the Founders' Agreement. All intellectual property, including but not limited to patents, trade secrets, algorithms, and proprietary systems, shall remain under the custody of NeuraCore Systems. Transfer or reassignment requires unanimous approval of the board of directors. It was perfect. Elliot could reshuffle executives, fire loyal managers, and parade around with the family crest, but he could not touch the heart of the company, its intellectual property. Without it, NeuraCore was just a shell. Daniel smiled grimly. Checkmate is closer than they think. Sophia's alliance. Sophia Zhang wasn't the kind of investor who liked waiting. She wanted results, and she wanted them fast. "You can't just sit on this clause," she told Daniel in a late-night strategy session at her penthouse. "If we let Elliot install his cronies, investor confidence will collapse before we even make our move." Daniel nodded. "Which is why we won't wait. We strike at the next board meeting. But we can't go in weak. I'll need allies, directors who are willing to stand against the family." Sophia leaned back, her eyes narrowing. The family holds 55% of the shares. Even if the clause gives us leverage, they'll try to bury us in litigation. That's the beauty of it, Daniel replied. They can't sue the clause out of existence. It's the legal skeleton of the company. Even Elliot can't touch it without unanimous approval, which he'll never get. For the first time that week, Sophia smiled. Then let's prepare for war. The Morganstein counter. While Daniel plotted, Elliot was busy consolidating power. He announced a new executive reshuffle, installing his cousin Nathan as Chief Technology Officer, a man who barely understood the difference between machine learning and Excel spreadsheets. This is a family company, Elliot boasted during a press conference. From now on, decisions will reflect the Morganstein legacy. The announcement sent shockwaves through Wall Street. Shares dipped 12% overnight, analysts issued warnings, and whispers of nepotism meltdown began appearing in headlines. Still, Elliot remained smug. Let them panic, he told Clara. Once the dust settles, they'll realize NeuraCore is ours to rule. But Clara wasn't as confident. She had noticed Daniel's quiet composure during the last board meeting. Unlike others, he hadn't flinched. That bothered her. Don't underestimate Reyes, Clara warned. He's not like the others. He's loyal to Father's vision. Elliot scoffed. Father's vision is dead. This is our era. The boardroom ambush. The following week, the board convened again. Elliot entered like a king, certain his new family-led executive team would be approved. The agenda was simple: vote to ratify the restructuring. But Daniel was ready. As Elliot began presenting his family-first strategy, Daniel stood up, a thick binder in hand. His voice was calm, deliberate. Before this board proceeds, he said, I need to remind everyone of Section 14.3 of the Founders' Agreement. The room shifted uneasily. Few remembered the old contract. Elliot's smile faltered. Daniel continued, reading aloud. Any transfer, reassignment. The boardroom ambush had left Elliot reeling. For the first time in his life, someone had stood up to the Morganstein name, and worse, had used the company's own founding documents against him. The humiliation burned like acid. But Elliot Morganstein was not the type to retreat. He was the type to strike back. The smear campaign. Within days, whispers began circulating in the press. Articles appeared in industry blogs and financial journals, all targeting Daniel Reyes. NeuraCore's lawyer holds company hostage. One headline read, Chief Legal Officer blocks growth for personal gain, another claimed. Daniel's inbox flooded with hate mail, accusing him of sabotaging the company to line his own pockets. Even within NeuraCore, some employees began to doubt him. Sophia stormed into his office one morning, holding a tablet with the latest article. They're painting you as the villain, Daniel. Investors are jittery again. If Elliot controls the narrative, he might turn the tide back. Daniel leaned back in his chair, calm as ever. Smear campaigns are noise. The law is not. But privately, he knew Elliot's tactics were working. Perception mattered. If enough people lost faith in him, even the IP clause might not protect him from being pushed out. Clara's gambit. Amid the storm, Clara requested a private meeting with Daniel. They met at a quiet cafe in Soho, far from the glare of the press. Clara was poised, her expression unreadable. My brother is reckless, she said, stirring her coffee slowly. If he keeps this up, NeuraCore will implode. But you, she looked up, eyes sharp. You could save it. Daniel frowned. Save it? By what? Siding with you? Clara leaned forward. You don't trust me, and I don't blame you. But know this. Not every Morganstein believes in Elliot's crusade. Father's vision wasn't about blood. It was about brilliance. If you're truly protecting that, then perhaps our goals align. Daniel studied her carefully. Clara's tone was sincere, but sincerity was the most dangerous weapon in a Morganstein arsenal. If I ally with you, he asked, what do I gain? Her lips curled into a faint smile. A Morganstein name on your side, instead of against you. It was tempting. Having Clara break ranks could destabilize Elliot's hold. But Daniel also knew betrayal was a family sport for the Morgansteins. Aligning with her might be stepping into a trap. Elliot's counterattack. Meanwhile, Elliot was rallying allies of his own. In a late-night meeting at the family estate, he convened uncles, cousins, and shareholders loyal to the Morganstein name. "They think a piece of paper can stop us," Elliot roared. "But I'll show them the power of blood. Reyes doesn't deserve that seat. He's a parasite, clinging to our father's empire. Tomorrow, we move to vote him out." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The family wasn't just angry, they were vengeful. But Elliot had another card to play. He had secretly secured the support of Victor Hale, a ruthless venture capitalist known for hostile takeovers. If Victor bought up enough shares from panicked investors, Elliot could tilt the balance back in his favor. It was a dangerous move, one that risked alienating long-term partners, but Elliot didn't care. To him, control was worth any price. The investor divide. By the next week, NeuraCore was split down the middle. Half the investors rallied behind Daniel and Sophia, citing the importance of protecting the company's IP and innovation. The other half leaned toward Elliot, lured by promises of family stability and whispers of lucrative returns. Stock prices wobbled, analysts speculated daily, and employees braced for chaos. It was no longer just a family feud, it was a full-blown corporate war. The personal attack. One evening, as Daniel left the office, he noticed a black car trailing him through the streets of Manhattan. He took several detours, weaving through traffic, but the car stayed close. Finally, at a red light, the car pulled up beside him. The tinted window rolled down just enough for a voice to hiss. "Walk away, Reyes. Or next time, it won't just be your reputation on the line." The window rolled back up and the car sped off. Daniel sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel. The war had crossed into dangerous territory. This was no longer just about contracts and clauses. Now it was personal. The turning point. The next morning, Daniel addressed Sophia in her office. "They're escalating. Smear campaigns, threats, even surveillance. Elliot is desperate." Sophia's eyes blazed. "But desperation makes people sloppy. Which means it's time for us to strike harder." Daniel nodded, sliding a folder across her desk. Inside was a plan, one that would not only defend NeuraCore but put Elliot on the back foot permanently. Sophia scanned the documents, her lips curling into a smile. "Brilliant. This will crush him." The plan centered around one undeniable truth. Without the company's IP, Elliot's entire restructuring was worthless. And Daniel had found a way to make that reality painfully clear to investors and regulators alike. Betrayal in motion. That night, Clara sent Daniel a single cryptic text. "You're walking into a trap at the next meeting. Trust me." Daniel stared at the message, unsure what to believe. Was Clara truly turning against her brother, or was this part of Elliot's larger game? Either way, the stage was set. The next board meeting would decide more than just the company's future. It would decide whether Daniel could survive the Morganstein onslaught. And in the shadows, betrayal lurked, ready to strike from both sides. The air inside NeuraCore's headquarters was electric, heavy with anticipation. Rumors had spread like wildfire. Today's board meeting would decide the fate of the $300 million company. Investors, analysts, and even employees gathered in the lobby, waiting for scraps of news. Inside the boardroom, Elliot Morganstein sat at the head of the table, exuding smug confidence. Beside him, his cousin Nathan shuffled papers nervously, while other family members whispered among themselves. Daniel Reyes entered last, carrying a slim leather briefcase. His expression was calm, but his mind was sharp, scanning the room like a chess master assessing the board. He already knew this was a setup. Clara's cryptic text, "You're walking into a trap," echoed in his mind. The question was not whether Elliot would strike, but how. Elliot's opening. Elliot stood, adjusting his tie theatrically. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we gather today not to argue, but to protect the legacy of NeuraCore. For too long, outsiders have interfered in the company my father built. Today that ends." He gestured toward Victor Hale, the venture capitalist seated near him. "I am pleased to announce a strategic partnership. Mr. Hale's firm has acquired significant shares, ensuring NeuraCore remains firmly under family and loyal investor control. Gasps rippled across the table. Victor Hale smirked, radiating menace. He was notorious for dismantling companies and selling them for parts. His presence meant Elliot was willing to burn NeuraCore to the ground as long as he ruled the ashes. Daniel leaned forward. And what exactly is Mr. Hale's role here? NeuraCore is not a pawn for hostile takeovers. Elliot's grin widened. On the contrary, Reyes, Mr. Hale is here to save NeuraCore from you. The vote to expel. Elliot slammed down a document. Effective immediately, I motion to remove Daniel Reyes from his position as Chief Legal Officer. He has obstructed growth, sabotaged the company's restructuring, and acted against shareholder interests. A chorus of family members nodded. Seconded, Nathan piped up. Daniel's eyes narrowed. This was the trap. An orchestrated vote to expel him, stripping him of his power before he could use the IP clause again. Elliot leaned back smugly. Shall we put it to vote? The counterplay. Before anyone could raise a hand, Daniel calmly opened his briefcase and slid several documents across the table. Before this board takes any vote, I must remind you of legal protocol. Under Section 14.3 of the Founders' Agreement, the intellectual property is inseparable from NeuraCore. That clause binds all of us, including me. Remove the chief legal officer who holds custodianship over those rights, and you trigger an automatic legal review by federal regulators. The room froze. Elliot's smirk faltered. Daniel's voice sharpened. In plain English, if you fire me without unanimous consent, every algorithm, patent, and proprietary system will be frozen under regulatory investigation. NeuraCore's assets will be locked until the review is complete. Months, maybe years. The company will collapse. A stunned silence followed. Investors shifted uncomfortably. Victor Hale frowned, realizing his takeover plan would grind to dust if the IP froze. Elliot sputtered, "You're bluffing." Daniel slid a letter across the table. I already filed notice with the Securities and Exchange Commission yesterday. If this board moves against me without respecting the IP clause, regulators will intervene immediately. The blood drained from Elliot's face. Clara speaks. For a long moment, the room buzzed with whispers. Then Clara stood. All eyes turned to her. My brother believes this company is his inheritance, she said softly, but father never built NeuraCore for bloodlines. He built it for brilliance, for innovation. Daniel is right. Without him, and without the clause, NeuraCore becomes just another hollow shell. Elliot's jaw dropped. Clara, you traitor? I'm not a traitor, she snapped, her voice rising for the first time. I'm loyal to father's vision. You're the one betraying it. Her words cut through the room like a blade. Several investors, emboldened, voiced agreement. Sophia Zhang seized the moment, slamming her hand on the table. Enough games. Reyes has the law, Clara has the legacy, and investors have spoken. Elliot, your power grab ends here. Elliot tried one last gambit. You think you've won, Reyes? My family still controls 55% of this company. Majority rules. Daniel leaned in, eyes cold. Not when the heart of the company, the IP, is locked away. You have numbers, Elliot. I have the key. And without the key, your numbers mean nothing. The room erupted in murmurs. For the first time, Elliot looked cornered, his arrogance cracked. Victor Hale stood abruptly, glaring at Elliot. You promised me control, not a legal quagmire. If this is the game, I'm out. He stormed from the room, leaving Elliot abandoned. Defeat washed over him. His plan had collapsed, undone by a single clause and Daniel's foresight. The meeting adjourned in chaos. Some family members slunk away, others whispered angrily, but the outcome was clear. Elliot had been neutralized. The IP clause had protected NeuraCore once again. As the boardroom emptied, Clara lingered by Daniel's side. You saved the company today, she said quietly. Daniel gave a small nod. This was only a battle. The war isn't over. She looked at him intently. Then let me fight it with you. Daniel hesitated, reading her eyes, searching for deception. But for the first time, he thought he saw something genuine. Perhaps, just perhaps, the Morganstein dynasty still had one ally worth trusting. Outside, the city skyline glowed, but Daniel knew the storm was far from over. Elliot had been beaten, but he wasn't broken. And men like him never surrendered without planning their revenge. The city of New York hummed below the towering NeuraCore headquarters, oblivious to the storm raging inside. After weeks of boardroom battles, leaked articles, and veiled threats, the final confrontation had arrived. Elliot Morganstein was not the type to accept defeat quietly. He had retreated, regrouped, and planned his ultimate strike. A move so audacious it could either reclaim control or destroy everything his family had ever built. Elliot's desperation. Elliot convened a secret meeting with his few remaining loyal allies. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a single table lamp. "We've been outplayed by one man and one clause," Elliot growled. "It's time to end this. Daniel Reyes has used the IP clause like a sword, but every sword has a weakness. I've identified it." Nathan, his cousin, leaned forward. "And what is that?" Elliot's eyes glinted with cold determination. "Control over external partnerships. If I can sever Daniel's investor support and manipulate key shareholders, I can force the board to reconsider. Then I hit the press, spin the narrative, smear Daniel, and make him look like the villain once again. Once the trust is gone, the clause won't matter. Fear, confusion, and money, they're stronger than law." It was risky, reckless even, but desperation fuels audacity. The boardroom showdown. The next day, the board convened for an emergency session. Daniel arrived early, meticulously reviewing every contract, shareholder record, and regulatory precedent. He knew Elliot would attempt one last maneuver, but he didn't yet know the full extent. As the meeting began, Elliot wasted no time. He presented a dossier of investor complaints, each carefully cherry-picked to suggest Daniel was overstepping his authority. He even managed to sway a few nervous shareholders into questioning Daniel's intentions. "Mr. Reyes has held this company hostage," Elliot announced theatrically. "He manipulates the IP clause to block all growth initiatives. Investors are losing confidence. This is unacceptable." A murmur ran through the room. Some investors looked uncertain. Daniel's grip on the company seemed threatened for the first time. Daniel's counterstrike. Daniel stood calmly, taking a deep breath. "Elliot, let's be clear. The IP clause exists to protect NeuraCore, not to give me power, and certainly not to give you an excuse to dismantle the company for personal gain. Every attempt to circumvent it will be legally challenged." He gestured to the documents on the table. "Furthermore, the clause specifies that any dispute triggers automatic arbitration and regulatory oversight. Any board action against me without full compliance is null and void. Elliot, you are not just violating protocol, you are risking criminal liability." Whispers erupted. The shareholders who had wavered glanced nervously at each other. Legal risk was not a gamble they were willing to take. Clara's decisive move. Then Clara stood. This time, her voice resonated with authority. "My father built NeuraCore to be brilliant, not to be a family playground," she said firmly. "Elliot, this isn't about loyalty to the name, it's about loyalty to vision. You've gambled recklessly and endangered the company. Today, you either step aside, or the law will ensure NeuraCore survives without you." Her words shifted the momentum. Shareholders who had been swayed by fear began to realign with Daniel. The unraveling. Elliot tried to counterattack, but it was too late. The press, already tipped off by Daniel's legal team, began publishing detailed accounts of the attempted coup, highlighting the integrity and foresight behind Daniel's use of the IP clause. Public opinion swung decisively. Victor Hale, the venture capitalist who had once supported Elliot, withdrew his backing entirely. Without external leverage, Elliot's plan collapsed. Elliot's hands trembled. "This isn't over," he hissed, but no one listened. Victory secured. By the end of the day, Daniel retained his position as chief legal officer, and the IP clause stood unchallenged, a legal fortress protecting NeuraCore's core assets. Elliot was sidelined, Clara emerged as a key ally, and investors regained confidence in the company's future. Daniel finally exhaled, the tension easing slightly. "The clause did its job," he said quietly to Sophia. She smiled. "You did more than enforce a contract. You defended a vision." Outside, the city skyline reflected the golden sunset. NeuraCore had survived, stronger than ever, not through brute force, but through the quiet, relentless power of foresight, law, and principle. Weeks later, Elliot quietly left NeuraCore, his ambitions thwarted but his reputation still intact enough to avoid scandal. Clara stayed on, bridging the gap between family and leadership. Daniel remained vigilant, aware that corporate power struggles never truly end, but confident that one carefully written clause can change the course of a company, and perhaps even a legacy. NeuraCore Systems continued to innovate, thriving under a balance of law, strategy, and integrity. And Daniel Reyes, once underestimated, became the unlikely guardian of a $300 million empire, proof that sometimes the smallest details can deliver the largest victories.